last interview I did through this stint of interviews was with Corey from Aquarium Co-op. Corey's a person that I've met probably several times. I would say at least 5 or 6 times at conventions, but I've never really talked to because he has such a large following that it can be kind of hard to get him off alone for any meaningful amount of time. We've had some brief written conversations back and forth with emails and perhaps some comments and things like that. But it was good to have an opportunity like this to really get to know one another. We did the interview on January 6th. It was a particularly heavy news day that day. We were both very distracted. The other thing is, in between my interviews with Chris and Corey, all my settings got messed up in the OBS, the program I was using to record it. So I was having some trouble. Corey was very patient with me as I got my audio issues mostly resolved. And then maybe 20 minutes into the interview, I started hearing a little bit of a crackle. I think there was a connection issue between our two things. And I didn't start it over. I just kind of let it go. And I was a little disappointed with how some of the audio was. So although it didn't sound as good as the others, in my opinion, I still thought it was good information. And it wasn't totally annoying to listen to. So I decided just to put it out anyway. I couldn't have done a series like this without including Corey. I wanted to at least ask, and I was very happy that he, pretty quickly replied. And he's a great way to book in this little set of 5 episodes because he does a lot not only from YouTube, but he kind of bridges YouTube and real life, with his store and his maybe the other community things he does around the internet too. Kind of a little bit broader scope than YouTube. And he's a real interesting guy, and it's fascinating to talk to. I really appreciated him spending some time with me and to talk to you guys. And if you haven't met Corey, well, I don't know where you've been, but if you haven't met Corey, I'm happy to introduce Corey from Aquarium Co-op. And I'll try to remember to look into the camera too. And
it's hard to do when you're with a personality, like you're like looking at, because you want to look at the person, and you're respectful, and you're like, wait, actually, I'm supposed to be talking to thousands of people that aren't here.
I've actually spent a few days like watching your videos, so this is weirdly interactive compared to stealing time, catching up with Aquarium Co-op. So, my first question to you is, what do people ask you about more? Being a YouTube personality or being a fish store owner?
I guess it depends on which circle I'm in. Like if I'm at a convention and I'm meeting and greeting all the fans, people almost only talk about YouTube and what it must be like to, like yesterday I walked into a Pecktec and I'm recognized, that type of stuff. But then if you're talking to vendors, they act like YouTube doesn't even exist. It's like, oh, do you have a store? Are you ready to buy some stuff? And then you try to kind of explain, you're like, you realize I have a big following that lets me sell more. And they just keep discounting that when you're talking to these giant corporations because they've never experienced this. So they don't know that, like, yes, we have an online store and a retail store, but that's totally discounted. So it really depends on who are you talking with. I mean, if I'm in China, for instance, and I'm looking at stuff, YouTube is illegal there. So it's definitely not there that would be happening. But then you'll meet, you might stumble upon Oliver Knott. And then we talk about YouTube all the time because he's there working on something. But we all know that doesn't matter there. So I would say that the average fan and person I run into asks more like, what's it like? And can you still do normal people stuff? And it's about a 50-50 on that. Yeah.
Do you have people in your life that don't know that or don't really perceive the following that you have?
I would say most of my family didn't until they were with me on a vacation. We had gone to Maui, and I had my mom and my wife, and then my aunt and her husband. And we were just at a farmer's market, and it was like a Wednesday night or something. And we're like walking through the crowd, and then someone's like, oh my gosh, is that Corey from Aquarium Co-op? And the looks on my family's faces, it's like the light bulb went off at that point. They're like, oh my gosh, people know who you are. And it's like, well, yes, I mean, it's a rarity that would happen in that rural of a setting. If I walk into a fish store, like, okay, yes. But in that, even for me, it's always like catch me off guard. Like you kind of get startled, like, oh, I was in incognito mode. I'm not supposed to be, and then you kind of fall into that. Yes, I am. Corey, you talk. Oh, what's your tank? What do you do? Oh, have you been following me? But there's most people. I keep a very close circle, so it's kind of family, coworkers, and very few friends, and they all kind of know and will follow what I do. But whether they understand, like my grandma knows I'm on YouTube, but she might not understand the scale of like what's that compared to other YouTube. It's still not Fox News or TV like she watches, so it's
Right.
not really portion.
And people are always surprised that you can make money. It's
Yeah,
like,
I had a story about that where when the first fish room tour I ever did, actually. So the first one I ever did was probably 2015 or so now.
huh,
And so I toured this fish room and I monetized it, right? And at some point, 6 or 8 months down the road, the people that I visited, and I told them I was going to monetize and everything like that, and a friend of them had said, "You know how much money he's making off you? You make 45 cents every view." And so they had thought at that point that I had made like $45,000, and if they got very angry about it, and so I actually had to show them. I'm like, well, I actually made $112. That's where we're at, and I mean, I guess I can give you a portion. I did say that video actually did like really well for my channel back then.
right,
It was
right.
like, really good, and it totally killed it when they were like, you have to turn off all advertising. And really, I didn't have to, but I don't want to make enemies. They're local people and everything, and so I did, and it totally killed the video. And the funny part was, they had a fish business that was selling fish, and they were getting tons of sales from it. And then all the sales dried up, and I was like, well, yeah, YouTube here doesn't promote anymore because I don't make my 1/100th of a cent when someone watches. You guys were the ones making the fish order.
Yeah. You'd have to look that video up specifically if there's no ad on it, because otherwise YouTube doesn't want to show it to anyone.
Exactly, and it featured African cichlids, and they still think I made a bunch, and even though I showed them the screens and everything.
Really?
And the weird part is I did the fish room because I admired what they did. We were in the same fish club, and we were all friends. And from that point, even after the proof, it was kind of a can't go back situation. Like they had called me out so hard, and I showed them the proof that like it's created this natural diversion, or like we just parted ways, which was unfortunate because they were very gifted breeders and it was good content and all of that. It should have worked out, but maybe it was me being too mean or something like that. I don't know. Didn't set expectations right. But everything since then, very upfront, like I will earn money, but now it kind of offsets like, well, I'd spent thousands of dollars to fly here, so this will help recoup some of that. Like rare is it that a video will make enough to even cover the expense that we put into it, where we make our money off of just selling stuff online, obviously.
Yeah, I think what I've discovered from talking to a lot of people that have been successful and are able to make a living, talking about fish on the internet, they've really diversified their income into a number of different streams. And I think that's true with kind of any business that you're in.
Yeah.
But you don't just talking head on YouTube. You can do that, but you're not going to do as well just being a talking head on YouTube, because tastes change and things change, and it's important to have a lot of different sources of revenue, and not just the ad system that kind of goes up and down and back and forth at the whim of YouTube's corporate office.
Oh yeah.
So how important do you think it is for new people in the hobby to have a good mentor to guide them down the at least the more correct path?
Yeah, so depending on what the definition of a good mentor is, I think it's crazy important. The right person that will encourage you to grow and learn, and not so much you need to do it like I do it, but each person, if I was to mentor a 12-year-old, that would be way different than someone who's let's say, super wealthy and 50 and says, I want to build a whole fish room. The mentorship there is very different. And
Yeah.
I think the commonality, though, is that, try and teach that you're going to make some mistakes. You're going to kill some fish. You're going to hit these stressful levels and things are going to go wrong. And we've all done that. And the old adage of like, the only reason I know more than you is I've killed more fish than you have currently. And so trying to impart that you get better through the mistakes and that type of stuff, and try to brace them maybe for the internet and other people's opinions of like, I always try to put it into cars or something where ask that person, they love Ford, this person loves Chevy and all that, and they'll fight to the death about who makes the better car. And the reality is, if you bought any of them brand new, they're going to get you to work tomorrow, and do you care about it as much as they do? And what are you getting out of it? As long as you got to work, you're happy. As long as your fish made you maybe not go out drinking that night, or whatever you're trying to do, because the hobby is a really kind of escape from the world. I think mission accomplished on that.
I think it's funny a lot. It is a big escape for me. I was talking to someone the other day, and I was saying that the maintenance. I think it was actually George Farmer. When I was talking to him, it's like the maintenance for me is the zen. I spend probably more time looking at my tank when I'm actually in there, kind of like fixing it.
But I 100% agree that so a mentor to me who actually built my store and helped me get my store going and everything, one of his big mantras was, you just have to touch the nature every day. And so cleaning the sponge filter and gravel vacuuming and all of that, because you're spending that time and you're inside the tank and you're touching things, you will notice so much more than a glance as you walk by to go to work or whatever you're doing. And so that's where I try to automate stuff in my hobby as much as I can, but no, I have to leave things in that I actually have to get my hands wet and dirty, because that's where you're actually going to really start experiencing your tank, as opposed to, take a good picture, look at it through a camera. But, when you lift that log and you go, oh my gosh, there's a dead fish in here that who knows how long it's been there. Like, you don't get that from, not that it happens all the time, but that's where you spot like, oh, there's all that mold. Oh, that's where that was going.
Sustainability is one of the core principles of your business. And what do you think is the biggest threat to that in the aquarium hobby?
I think right now it's a mindset that's the biggest threat of like, we need more. You need a bigger filter, you need more fish, you need more tanks, you need more things. When I travel the world, you'll see people that have one aquarium and they get 50 hours of enjoyment a week out of it. And then you might travel to a fish room here and they have 400 aquariums, and they're like, I can barely be bothered to come in here and feed the fish. And so that consumption of everything and our marketing and everything that goes into it, of like, you need to buy just a better version of that. You need to use cartridges you throw away. Let's make it easier. And, the fact that we even still have plastic plants in the hobby, like there are tanks that it makes sense for, but then you'll see, like, I'm always shocked when I see glowfish or something and you have fake plants. Like, these are the perfect fish to have with live plants, And so I think that it's that mentality that is the biggest threat of viewing fish as expendable, and a lot of the hobby being throwaway, and not working with all of the fish stores, big or small, and trying to keep people in. There's a lot of models that go, a new fish customer is worth $1,000, and then a customer at 5 years is only worth maybe $1,800. So if we just get them the first year, whether they leave or not, it's cheaper to market to getting someone in than it is to teach them and keep them for 5 years. And so I think that is a detrimental way to look at the hobby and to keep it sustainable. Obviously there's lots of, recycling and all of that we can do and preserve nature and everything. But at the core of it, what I hope that people take away from the hobby is, when I don't change my water, when I overfeed, when I do something wrong, the environment that I have gets impacted negatively. And then maybe you realize, I don't pour that oil down the sewer drain, or I don't do this thing that would be normally in your normal life, that you now can think ahead and go, oh, that little bit of dish soap killed my entire aquarium. maybe I shouldn't wash my dishes while camping with Dawn in the river or something.
Hmm. Well, that's a really good point. I mean, I think aquariums have as much to teach us about what, how huge the impact we make on environments. Even though, obviously an aquarium is a very small ecosystem that is easily disrupted compared to the world outside, it's still, I mean, all the principles are still there. All the little mechanisms are still there to cause chaos or be a benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. You stated in the past how much you've enjoyed working with kids. How many young folks do you see entering the hobby as the first family member in their household to have a tank?
I would say that number's got to be really small. What I find is, while working in the store, which I haven't done in a couple of years, so maybe it's changed in the last 2 years, but um, if it was the first person in that family and they were the younger person to get in, it was met with lots of trepidation. So more like, well, this child here is 14 and they've wanted an aquarium for a long time. They finally saved up their own money, and we have no other ways to say no at this point. And so we are now entering this venture. And it's actually a very hard thing because usually there's a limited budget, and you really want to get this kid in because you know he or she is super passionate about it, but they don't really have the funds to be crazy successful. And you know, the first time it doesn't work, they won't be allowed to do it again. So you end up kind of donating a lot and making sure, like, here's a couple scoops of gravel. Like, what can I do to really make sure this first attempt is going to work? Because that is what can make it grow. So even though they're going to do it and let the kid choose everything and all of that, it really comes from, I want to give that experience back to my kids, and so they already know kind of what they're getting into, and it could be enjoyable. And we're going to teach science, and we're going to use it to learn. But it's always a little extra special. Like I have a real soft spot for any kid that like can't drive yet that breeds fish. It's
Oh
kind of
no,
for
yeah.
a lot of the kids I would do. We'll trade any fish one for one within reason. So it's like if you have 400 platies, we don't have 400 discus. But if you want to trade a bunch of platies in, and it's might be worth $20, but it's like here's $100 worth of discus, knowing that when you make discus babies, you're going to trade those in and get whatever you want. And that worked out well for quite a few kids because they couldn't have multiple tanks, and allowed them to keep kind of sharpening that breeding fish game for them. And it was really enjoyable to see when kids would kind of overcome the obstacles, because as adults it's kind of a pay to play thing. Like, okay, well, I'll buy 10 pairs of that fish and one's bound to breed. Where when you watch a kid, they saved up allowance, and now they just bought a pair of German blue rams. And if one was to die somehow, they got too aggressive or they weren't prepared correctly, that's another 6 weeks of waiting. You just somehow I value it more, and I think a lot of the employees do as well.
I think it's wild when you see a young person and they've saved up to buy a really nice LED light or a bow front tank or even a little, Fluval Spec 5 or something like that instead of Call of Duty or whatever Switch game is the big thing to buy that day. I'm always real impressed. I have a fairly so I made a video where I kind of talked about I'd had a couple too many negative experiences with older folks, and I blame the older folks, not the kids. But they'll get their kids a fish and then just kind of like, here, learn how to keep it.
Mm-hmm.
At best, or they bring them home. My biggest pet peeve is they bring them home from birthday parties and stuff like that. I can't stand that.
We get that a lot at the store. Weddings are another big one. We need a fish for every centerpiece and all of that. And we just say no to that. But back to the kids, one of my favorite ads that I ever saw kind of on billboards was, it was something to the effect of like, do you want your kid to do this or this? And one of it was kids' hands around a controller. I think it was like an Xbox controller, and then kids' hands around like a bullfrog.
Right.
And it was kind of, and I don't even remember like what it was actually marketing. Like, I don't know if it was just like some, outreach program saying like, maybe we should get people more back into nature instead of video games. But I thought that kind of broke it down really well of like, yeah, of the things you can have, the younger generation get into. And not that, like, I play video games and everyone should play some video games, but don't let it be the only thing someone does. And, I think fish tanks and video games go hand in hand. You got to play in a video game and you got your fish doing something right next to you.
Yeah. I think that they're a great positive, it's a great positive experience. And there's a lot of people too that can't have traditional pets. Maybe they have allergies and stuff.
We learned that when we opened the store. I was all set to have a store dog.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
was like, yeah, I'm going to have my store. I'm going to get a dog. It's going to be amazing. And then, like, within the first week or something of being open, there was like an outpouring of people like, I'm so glad you only have fish. I'm allergic to like everything else. And so we never got a shop cat or a dog or anything because I'm not allergic to anything, but I didn't realize how good that was. Like, that makes perfect sense. You're allergic to animal hair. Of course you're going to love fish. And yeah, half the pet stores you could never go into.
That's true. We had a store in Knoxville it was a great store, and I shopped there from the time I was 16, mostly for reptiles. It was called Fins and Skins, and it was a reptile and aquarium store. But the smell of the reptile half of the store seemed to like overpower the rest of the store. and I remember I was like, oh, especially after I stopped keeping reptiles and I started to care a little bit more. I remember wishing that I was like, oh, I wish it was just fish in here, but
Yep. And we know from a marketing standpoint, if you really want to sell fish, not having the spider section and all of that, because each thing you add, there's always going to be people that are, maybe they don't want to see the snakes, they don't want to see the spiders, they're allergic to cats, they're allergic to dogs, the birds are, being loud. It's like, if you truly want to focus on fish, that's the way to do it. And, the traditional pet store is like, but we'll do all your pet needs. And it captures a large portion of the market, but there's a huge section of I just want the fish. And that's what we tried to focus on. And it worked pretty well. I mean, all the employees, and we all have, I've got dogs, I've had reptiles, in the past, and everyone dabbles and stuff. When I was at Pecktec the other day, they were talking about how everyone's got stick bugs breeding up a storm at that Pecktec. Like, you're just once a pet person, always kind of a pet person that'll let you get into it. So, but I think there does need to be that outlet for people with allergies and stuff. And, we run into it even just with, bloodworms and brine shrimp, and people got to be careful. So
that's right. Some people are allergic to bloodworms and stuff, right?
yeah, and we have to be careful. Like, we've had an employee actually that developed an allergy to it, and they wore gloves and everything, and it wasn't super severe, but you do have customers that will be super severe, and they actually will want to know, like, hey, were you just feeding out bloodworms or anything? I can't be touching the bag and everything. Like, I can go into shock. And so, but you remember those employees or those customers, and really try to make sure that none of that cross contamination is going on, because usually, you might be feeding fish. Oh, I need a net of fish, or if you just, fed bloodworms in that tank, and you're netting and everything, and they're touching the outside of the bag and transfer, and how allergic are you? So
You took a trip to Peru not long ago. What's something that you understand better now before going there and seeing where a lot of the fish that we get come from?
yeah, so for me, it was, what we keep in an aquarium is nothing like nature at all. In that there's so much mold and debris and poor lighting and plastic bottles and garbage and that tire and all of this stuff, which we'd be mortified, which if it was in our aquarium, and yet you're like, oh, look at that cichlid's breeding inside the tire, and oh, look, there's a fish stuck inside that plastic bottle, and that so many fish die from natural causes. So we think about, like, all of that stuff I just talked about, all that pollution. Yeah, it's horrible, and it is. But then so many fish just naturally die in the waterway that, oh, they got separated from the mainstream. We've all seen that. We've walked a river or something like that, a little jetty or something. That, like, oh, it got cut off. All the fish in there just die. And there's, the first thing that when you go there and you're with guides and stuff, everyone's instinct, they say, is always, we have to save these fish. Or either that, or we need to collect these fish and take them home to our aquarium. And they struggle with teaching you that those fish are already dead. They're already oxygen deprived. Putting them in a bucket's not going to help. Putting them out in the back in the water is not going to help. They're weakened. They haven't been eating. They're just going to get eaten by another fish instantly. You're going to spend all day basically feeding fish to a bigger fish, thinking you're helping them. And so that was a hard thing to like. You don't comprehend the amount of tetras and just all the fish that are going to die with that cycle in Peru of like, yeah, floods, and there's billions of fish that breed, and there's so many, and then the water comes down, and 99% of those die. And so what we take out while it's wet, on average, doesn't even have an impact on what's going to happen in there while we're super worried about it. But if we do it in any remote or any way sustainably, it should work just fine. Now, there were locations we went to where it was like a cattle pond or something like that where it didn't boom and bust. And so if you did fish that, you could overfish it easily, and that would become a problem. But for the most part, just seeing that every ditch and everything like that had really cool fish in it, and that the Amazon River, even when low, is so wide you can't see the other side. It is hard to. You see it on a map, you're like, yeah, that's a big river, and then you see it in person, you're like, wow, you can't comprehend how big it is and how deep it is, and all of that. Even when it's at its lowest, we were getting to points where the boat couldn't go any further, and it's towards the end of the season at its lowest, and it's still a massive thing. And the houses that we went to some people that collected fish and would sell them to the exporters and everything, and all those houses were on floats, so they were just sitting on the sand, kind of crooked, and all the tanks would be like one side would be full and the other side would be really low because it would just sit like that. And when the water came back up, they would then float. And there was like these makeshift bridges. One actually collapsed while I was going over it. Luckily, like no one got hurt. But they're just like, it's like if you've ever walked on a board that's seen, the outdoors for way too long, and you're like, that thing's slippery and gonna break. That's the only thing they've got for like these little bridges and makeshift things. And then you've got the other obstacle of all the power that kind of goes to the houses. It's just like these really low hanging lines that it'd be like I'm stringing it out there, and they're all open wires, so you got to be kind of really careful. And when you see kind of fish and stuff thriving in those types of environments, then you come back to our perfectly escaped ADA tank and all of that. You're like, oh, okay. So when I do kill fish, it's probably like killing it with kindness and not so much adverse conditions got them, because it's like I've seen adverse conditions, or what I consider adverse conditions, and the fish love it.
Well, I always wondered too, like I've always thought that too, like how pristine our aquariums are compared to. I think I started noticing it was like when botanicals became more widely used. And I got my first set of botanicals, and I took a nice pristine aquarium and I dumped leaves in it, like something I would pick out of a swimming pool or a pond or whatever. And I'm like, that looks so much better. Why does that look so much more? Because that's what it would be. I mean, it would just be covered with leaves, like literally clogged with leaves and stuff. And I think it's funny, and I wonder like to us it looks better, all nice and clean. But I wonder if you throw a fish in there, they're like, what is this place?
I do think
it's unnatural.
I don't know if natural is the right word. I think a natural aquarium that would have lots of kind of molmy and just stuff that had fallen in and breaking down. It's got way more little crustaceans that live in it, way more little microfoods for babies, and it in general will raise a fish and keep them healthier and better. But it's unsightly to us, and it's always a dichotomy of what do we want and what are we willing to take care of versus something else. And I try to run some natural aquariums in my fish room, and the internet just loses their mind. Like, how could you abuse those fish? And you're like, these are wild caught. If you knew what they were living in, where they came from, like this is mimicking that. I can't always know that where they came from wild is their preferred living condition, but
I threw a tire in and everything.
Yeah, they weren't spawning in pristine conditions, and they're still not spawning in this like more molmy condition, but they're eating a lot more active and they're coming out a lot more, so they're showing some good signs. And so I have a real open mind when it comes to that, of just like, I know, I would love to see so many more things out there of what is it actually like? What are the temperatures actually like? You know, when you go and you, some of the times the water's really warm, sometimes it's really cold. Like when we were in Peru one time, it got so cold where the temperature, you're thinking, okay, tropical fish, all of that, got to be hot all the time. And it dropped into the 40s and it was a storm. And where we were staying, this little like house that had wax floors and everything, and generator for heat or for lights. There's no actual windows. It was just screen to keep bugs out. And then you didn't have any blankets. You had one thin sheet because 9 times out of 10 it's really hot there. And so, but then I started thinking, I'm like, wait, it got down into the 40s, like really cold for like a couple of days, really raining. And when you went and collected the next day in that rain, the water was much cold, like noticeably cold. And here we would say like, but that discus is gonna die in too cold of water. And it's like, yeah, but the water's really cold today. So I think we don't give enough credit to, they can handle, you know, maybe they do go down in the 50-degree water, 60-degree water for a week or two, and then they come back up. We're thinking, oh, heater broke, that doesn't get fixed tomorrow, everything's dead. And the reality is fish are really hardy. We just push them to their breaking point without knowing it most times.
You've got so many wheels turning all at once, and a new fish room coming around. I saw you've got a couple of updates that you put out. Like I think I saw you hanging track lighting was one of the last ones I saw. How close are?
This, well, I don't even know how close they are to being done. It's the scale of it is what I didn't anticipate for. So like track lighting, it's taking forever because we're hanging 48-foot tracks. So like in my current fish room, I looked the other day and I was like, oh, we hung 4. So everything is, you know, like we have to drill tanks. It's like, okay, well, I got to drill of the ponds. We're going to do, it's something like 62 of them. And then got tanks, 15 tanks. And that's just for that one room. And so, you know, some of it is COVID delays and just like getting stuff. And then some of it is making sure we do it right and dreaming up a way to do it better than we've ever done it before. So there's a little bit of that of like, how are we going to make that happen? And whenever we build a fish room, it's kind of like, you know, this could be the best ones forever until you find out what's wrong with it. And you're like, okay, next time. And that's where we're at now. And I'm trying to do it where, you know, if I do it right, this is the last build ever. It's been crazy expensive, but I don't want to shortchange it and then in 2 years going, well, we got to tear that part out because we couldn't afford to do it right. So I'd rather like wait and like generate the funds and buy that more expensive part that we wanted to go there. And it's stuff like doing it right from the beginning, like insulation, and we put in a commercial dehumidifier. We put in a heat recovery ventilator in there. And so there's these gadgets where it's like the $1,000 gadgets that you have to have one. No, but will it be amazing when they run silent instead of that loud dehumidifier when you've got a camera on? Yes, it will be amazing, and we can forward think. And you can only really do that. We've got all the insulation out because they opened up a wall, and there was way too much mice activity, and the attic was all like that. So all of that had to come out, and that's it's like a $12,000 expense that we weren't planning on. But while you got that out, we can redo the wiring. We can put in these extra gadgets like that would have not been impossible, but quite difficult otherwise. And so a lot of things get thrown in the way. And so it's like, well, just time. Let's just do it right. And, luckily I have a functioning fish room right now. I mean, for the most part. I'm not going to load up the 800 gallon only because it's so hard to catch fish back out that, no, I don't wish that upon anybody having to catch fish out of there. So, but, I think a realistic goal next couple of them, well, we're already producing some content out of there, but I would say 4 to 6 weeks to really have it up and running, kind of auto water changing, some fish actually being there. Like where the studio is, it's at my new house. I don't even live there yet. So that's one of the problems. We have a fish room here that has to eat every day. There's stuff that has to go on. And the other big portion of it was internet. So where I moved to, it's it's on 10 acres of property, which is amazing. It's got a big pond and all these good things. And the internet is terrible. So much so that I buy 4 connections, and I learned all this technology to bond them together. so that I can get 8 megabytes upload, which is like the minimum for YouTube live streaming.
Oh yeah.
So, but luckily I was able to inquire and went down the long path of getting them. They're going to run a fiber line, which will be the first residential fiber line they've put in with a cost, but then I'll be able to actually like live stream and do everything. So I'm kind of waiting for that to happen. They said first quarter of this year. I've been talking with them, for months now.
Mm-hmm.
So once that goes in, it makes a lot more sense to move what we're doing right now, because it would be lagging and choppy and all that from there to really move everything over. So we're mostly waiting on someone else's timeline of, even if it was all done, I'd still have to come back here, which we want to sell this house to help pay for all this ASAP. So, we're just waiting for dominoes to fall in the right order.
How many people does it take to move an 800-gallon aquarium?
Yeah, so I think originally we used about 8. The big trick that I learned, or what you learn, is do everything you can to avoid going through doorways. Because once you could have a person on each corner, that's 4, and then you've got like an extra person on each end and each side, and that's 8 people. The minute you got to go through a door, all those extra people have to shave off. Essentially, you can get 2. There's a 4-foot wide tank, so you can have 2 like doing this kind of like little grip. So it's a new place, much bigger doors on a lot of the stuff, and I already have a forklift there full time because we store business stuff there. So I'm hoping that we can utilize that to make it a bit easier to get into place. There'll still be some heavy lifting and final movements, but off the back of a truck and into a building and position maybe 5 feet from where it has to be lifted to off the forks would be a nice help, because the stand is actually way heavier than the tank itself. The tank is heavy and it's awkward, but the stand, the steel is that takes 8 people all grunting. It's that where the tank is just like, mostly it's everyone's anxiety of like, if anyone drops this, it's over. The stand, you can drop it, but it also is take the toe right off or something.
Right, it'll just kill you.
Yeah, there's that. Where the tank, it probably won't kill you, but we'll be real sad that $50,000 aquarium just doesn't exist anymore.
Oh my gosh!
And I've seen too many horror stories like that where I got a buddy and no one's really at fault because they're like, well, I was helping you carry your crazy, dangerous, heavy thing for free, and then you just kind of go, oh, it's just gone.
Maybe you should just pay someone and take out an insurance policy too.
That's the problem, is the insurance underwriters a lot of times won't do it, and it's like you call like piano moving companies, they're like, no, this is way harder to move than a piano. Like this is acrylic, but they're thinking glass and all this, and like we have our machinery is made to handle the pianos, they're not made to handle this, this wide of a tank and all of that. And so yeah, this time we're gonna get a U-Haul, get a bunch of people, and you plan an entire day hoping it only takes 3 hours. But, you've got you don't want to rush anything. If you get there and you're like, we need a dolly, you need to go buy the dollies and everything you need, not just like, well, what if you just do this, put on a skateboard and like get it there? Like, you can't do any of that because that's where stuff fails.
Skateboard snaps in half.
Yeah, something goes wrong and now someone like your fingers pinned, or, you don't want any nightmare scenario to happen.
Should have got a dolly. Those fingers can be sewed back on, though.
Yep.
Okay. So, very early on in your fish keeping career, like way before aquarium co-op and all that, you had a pretty tragic moment where you had a substrate reaction and basically killed off a lot of your tank and stuff. How do you, and you've obviously gone on to do great things since then, but how do you get past, I think you told someone in the past, I saw in an interview where you said, well, I nearly quit.
I did almost quit.
And that was just about it for you. How do you push past that and get back on the horse after tragedy like that?
Well, I think luckily the way my brain works helped a little bit. And what I mean by that is, once I found out what went wrong, I then could prevent it from happening again. At the point where everything was dying and I couldn't understand why, fear doing it again and all of that. And there was, it was my prized clown looks collection. So I'm newer to the hobby. I'm into it for maybe a couple of years or something. And my big thing was touring every fish store like you do and oh man, there's that big clown loach that's $80. Like, oh, I'd love to own that, right? And you start buying up these bigger ones, and you've got this collection, and then because I'm buying all these expensive clown loaches, I thought I would save a bunch of money by using pond substrate in there to grow plants, because that was the next thing in my hobby is like I like growing plants. I want to grow more plants. This tank was 110 gallons, but it was 7 feet long. It was an L-shaped aquarium, which is a terrible design. Don't let anyone ever build that again. But you end up with about 2 feet where you can't see fish that swim into the corner, and the way the acrylic in water reacts, you've got like 2 foot dead zone. But nevertheless, it was a 7 foot long aquarium that was basically, kind of 2 4 foot aquariums matched up in the corner where it did that. So I needed lots of substrate, and I didn't know enough at the time, and maybe no one did or whatever. No one realized, but the substrate meant for a pond plant, it's like, oh yeah, make a little potter, put your plant in there, and it will be dispersed over maybe thousands of gallons of water. Instead, I put several bags of the stuff as my substrate in this tank that was like 160 gallons or something. And the ammonia went sky high because that's what the fertilizer was. And it was causing all of the fish's skin to like kind of melt off. I was convinced it was pH burn because I had a bunch of wood in there. And I was like, but every time I tested the pH, it was fine. And so I would do these massive water changes, and some more would be dying. And it took like, I want to say like a week to 10 days of just stuff dying every day. And you take out these larger bodies and you feel horrible every day. You do another massive water change and all the wood would come out. That's got to solve it. And it got down to just fish and substrate. And you're thinking, yeah, rocks and substrate. How can how can stuff still be dying? And at some point in those 10 days, I finally got the ammonia kit out, and like, oh my gosh, ammonia's through the roof. And so you're doing 95% water changes like every day, going, okay, I should be through. I'm not feeding them. And then you think, okay, well, that fish died, maybe it released a bunch of ammonia. Okay, another giant water change. Eventually, I figured out through Googling and all of that there's lots of ammonia in that substrate, and I found out, and I may have saved one or two fish, like a Jurapari and like one other thing, but it was devastating to know that you'd lost all the work you'd been trying to do, and it was the closest I've ever been to actually giving up and just being like, well, I should just tear it down, and maybe that's it. Because that was kind of the pinnacle of the hobby for me, is in my living room, and I think I had one other tank, and at the same time, maybe not the same time, but like 6 months before or something, I had the other tank was a 100-gallon tank and had a bunch of African cichlids, and I had a little bit of luck breeding them and that kind of stuff, and I wanted them to grow faster and all that, so I started feeding them kind of frozen bloodworms and some other frozen foods, and actually gave them all basically Malawi bloat. And so once I realized that, I stopped doing it, but they kept dying for months afterwards because it was still blocked up, and it still spawned. And so it was kind of these back-to-back defeats of like setting up my perfect aquarium that kind of was making me wonder, like, should I keep doing this? Meanwhile, still like crazy addicted to basically like EverQuest and WoW, and it was like easy enough to be like, let me just fall back into video games and not worry about this. And luckily my wife still had a goldfish tank, which is one goldfish in a 29, and eventually I kept at it. I think you go through a period, if anyone's been without a fish tank after being a fish nerd, like the intensity to own fish only increases the more you don't have fish. Like it's almost like there's a balance of, if I have enough work where I dread doing it, I have the right number of fish. Anything less than that, clearly I don't have enough. So
that's a fun analogy, and I think that's a story for a lot of fish keepers too. I mean, especially in the initial experiences, and I'm not talking about the first week or first month, but after you think you know everything,
you got enough under your belt to go, I know what I'm doing,
and then you make some like crucial mistake that, like we were saying before, you're dealing with a very finite amount of environment, and then you make a tragic left turn, and things can go wrong.
All the right canister filters, the hang-on backs, like I had paid all the money for this thing to work, and you get back those basics, and it's a good humbling point, and that's, I think, what makes it where I can understand anyone having a problem today is like, I've been there, I remember that, no amount of money would have got me through that. That was just a lesson I had to learn to make me a better fish keeper.
So Corey, aside from just a terrific fish keeper and a owner and a presenter on YouTube, you're also a community builder. You've really brought a lot of people together in different like community groups and things like that. What would your advice be to someone else if they wanted to kind of start a community in kind of the way that you do?
Yeah, so I think I found that the communities I was a part of had dried up, kind of when the everything went from forums to Facebook and all of that, kind of put a wall up on what my hobby was, and that was the forums of fish keeping. And I couldn't really find where I fit in, so I was like, well, maybe there's people that comment on my videos, and that was nice. And how do I talk to them some more? And then you get I got popular enough where you get people that don't like what you're doing also, like they follow you to troll you essentially.
Anti
And for
fans.
a long time I had tried different things and it wouldn't work. Like I was always community minded. Like I knew that this is something special, and maybe, I just know that I don't interact with a lot of people or a lot of different things. So this is very special to me. And I see that you get more stories of like, this is changing my life. I'm a recovering alcoholic or addict, or like it was a special thing fish keeping is. And it's one of the only hobbies that transcends the whole world. It's kind of like soccer or football, soccer, that like it's a worldwide thing. There's not too many things that are worldwide hobbies. You're like, oh, you bowl? That's pretty much only us, Americans. Like it's a weird thing. So knowing that it was like a worldwide thing, and for a long time I tried to make it where it was this open group that would be open to anyone, and that only ever caused me headache and caused infighting with like people of the community. And the one thing that I was always very adamant about is that this is not just an echo chamber. I'm not just surrounding myself with yes people or anything like that. Like I let pretty much anything go. Everyone's right to an opinion. And then I would say about a year ago, maybe a little more, I realized that this whole time my vision of what I wanted is actually an echo chamber. Not to tell me, oh, Corey, you're great and you're right, but if you don't like planted aquariums, don't hang out here, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you want to say how African cichlids are the best, this isn't the right community for you. I love African cichlids, but there's a community for that. And so I actually realized and learned to embrace I am making an echo chamber. I want people that do want to enjoy nature daily, want to play with planted community tanks, want to be nice to people. Like there are Facebook groups and things like that. They're just out there to tear down fish YouTubers and other personalities, and they get a lot of enjoyment out of picking apart what was done wrong and how they could troll. And I understand, I get it from gaming culture, I totally understand, and that's their fun. But that's actually the people you want to keep out from this community, because this person who just lost someone in their family and has turned to fish keeping to get them through this doesn't need the person trolling. And so that's where I've been able to craft our community. And I really respect other communities too. Of like, I totally get it. You're the goldfish community. I get it. You're this community. I understand. And when I approach that, I'm much more open to, you do this because that's what works for your group, just like we do this because this is what works for our group. Why don't you should do this, and you should have a Discord, and you should do all that, and that's not what works for me. And my a lot of my demographic is actually older, and so we have people 50, 60, 70, and using a forum and email and stuff is already like not too advanced, but it's up there for them. And then going, well, okay, you got to go to this Discord server. Yeah, you got to put it in. You got to do all this. You got to get mics set up and all of that so you can interact and don't talk over each other. And while technology is always moving and is great, we want to remain the most accessible possible. And I think that's one of the keys is, how do you remain accessible and then also self audit? Like we actually took ourselves off of. We had a Facebook group that we basically have abandoned at this point with, I want to say it's like 25 to 27,000 people in the Facebook group. So it's a decent amount of fish keepers. And the good news is they were, for the most part, all part of the community of like, we like planted aquariums, we want to respect each other, but Facebook in general allows bad actors and people that I know in real life are amazing in real life, and then somehow it's like, what's wrong with you, Ant? Whatever. Like, you're a maniac when it comes to Facebook because there's no repercussions, and so we got tired of kind of policing that and trying to fight that off of like, why is it that you see this political thing and then the next thing just sets you off on how this person's keeping their fish in their aquarium, how you don't like it. And one of the best moves we ever did was transition that community. It's a much smaller community of about 3,000 people now over on our forum on the website, but it somehow, it's like taking a kid or something like that. You put them in a different setting and they will behave differently. And that's what happened here is like people, I think, are just too accustomed to fighting on Facebook or in some of these other ways. And this forum where we control it and we don't allow things to really get out of hand, it's worked out pretty well. And over time, your community will grow and people will gravitate towards it and they'll invest time in it. If you keep their vision going, if I do want a safe space. And we had things where like our forum, we didn't want it so that when we make a new post in the Facebook group, you instantly get a notification. We want it to become a part of your lifestyle. Maybe you check in the morning or when you're on lunch at work, but not feel like you're missing out if you're not constantly checking. That was one thing that I knew was kind of taking over my life with social media. And I thought, well, how can I still get my fishy fix, but in a much more sustainable, because I'm that guy that for many years was, I better check Instagram in the morning before I'm going to bed, make sure I'm not missing people tagged us and did all of that and what's going on. I can keep my finger on the pulse. And now I can much more kind of lazy check in. And a lot of people thought we were crazy for doing it and they maybe had never experienced it for them. And now they understand like, oh, you can search for the old information that's there in the threads and the DIY and you have people doing amazing DIY projects because they can make the pictures and everything and people can follow it instead of I put all this time into a Facebook post and it was gone 4 hours later, couldn't even find it because it's
Bottom
still
of
there.
the scroll somewhere. Yeah.
Exactly. And so they didn't even realize that this was kind of a possible culture, and this culture was very popular in the early 2000s. But the thing that I had witnessed, because I came into fish keeping kind of 2009 or something, maybe earlier 2007, but the elitism already existed on a lot of the forums. Like if you weren't there since like '97 basically and you didn't know everything, you were accepted but kind of the outcast. And I knew like, okay, well, if we can prevent that so the new person coming in isn't, oh, here we go, they're asking how to save their tank from ammonia. It's like, no, this exists to help that person. And that's how we get more people doing this rad DIY project and just being a good member. And so you end up getting people that are like kind of quasi moderators. And one of the good things we were able to do is because technology never stopped advancing, like our forum, it's all user police, just like Reddit is. People can upvote and downvote, and it's not, Big Bad Corey came in and banned everything. Like I do have that power, but mostly it's like, look, the people voted that they don't like what's going on right now, and so it's not just me saying don't do it. It's your fellow people using this saying we don't like this, and so it's a lot easier to police that and go. And then I also have what I think is a very clever way to get back in. So if I ever ban someone, the requirement is they have to write 1,000-word, essentially essay on some fish topic they really enjoy and post it back to the forum. If you're willing to do that, because then it brings you back, and if you've done it correctly, people are going to enjoy what you've done, and they're going to hit you with positivity, and you can then experience, if I contribute, people are much more friendly to me, and maybe I should, usually a bad actor that got banned was spending their time doing bad things. If I now do positive things and I get reinforcement, they're more likely to come back and be a positive member instead of just one more chance, you screw up, you're fired. It's more, come back. Everyone, this is free. Everyone can write 1,000 words, and then
Yeah, sure.
teach people what you're passionate about, and then you'll find the people that are passionate about it, and you can work with them in that micro community in there instead of just feeling like you were the outcast. So I think it's working pretty good, and I don't have any goals of mass adoption. The bigger anything gets, the harder it gets to keep everything going smoothly. But I hope that the other people that hang out there, not just my employees and myself. I hope they'll find ways to also help keep the right theme going.
I think moving to a forum is a brilliant idea. Moving back away from Facebook and away from a place where there's so much controversy. Like it's like if you travel to another place to go view some opinions of view some information. It's like it sort of does take you out of that kind of conflicting area where maybe someone's just aggravated you a second ago, and the next second you're on this fish forum and someone's even mildly annoyed you.
You have to make a conscious decision that you want to go consume fish stuff, and it's not just in your feed while you're fighting with your spouse or anything. It's like, I have to go, and I have to go. I want to be here right now, and everyone has to make that decision. And it's a subtle difference, because a lot of times you can be on Facebook or something else, and you're having a good day, and you're having a great post and all of that, but you also catch everyone on their bad days too. If you're there every day, it's only a matter of time. You weren't feeling that well, something went wrong at work, and the good thing is something off-site. People pretty much log into Facebook every single day, but they can willingly take a break, and it's not detrimental. And what I really wanted was you could take a week off. You went on vacation, you come back, you catch up on what you missed. It wasn't like it's gone forever. There's not the FOMO, the fear of missing out. Like, you can take time off. Please do, so that you enjoy the time while you're here.
As content creators, we use and encounter lots of different products. Is there anything you've come across that would be that you found like perplexing? Like, how did this enter the market? Crazy, unusual product that just won't work.
Yeah. And so I see how the product works and everything, and I'm just going to tell the story of why it's perplexing to me. And people will be able to figure out probably the product they were in the company, and they did approach me and they wanted me to sell it and promo and all of that. But for me personally, where I really was like, this is like, it's gone full circle here. Like, this is crazy. So working in a pet store before I owned my own, we sold Lee's gravel bags, right? And they would always come with this weird contraption on the end of them. You're meant to like put it into the gravel, and it wouldn't let any gravel get sucked up, which
the little grates, like the little cage,
yeah, the
right?
grating, right? Yeah. And my whole thing is like, you tumble the gravel and you get it clean. Like, this makes it harder. So we would actually remove, because like before I got there, they would sell it with it on, and you just get calls like, it's not working. This thing's not sucking up. And so you would just have endless problems. And so we just started taking them off. They'd come in from the wholesaler, we'd throw them out. Like, that problem went away. And so then you have this product now that it's an add-on for like the Python and all that. And it's someone's making it. I don't know. Like, I can't remember the exact company, but it shouldn't be too hard to find. And it's a little thing that goes over it again. And I'm just like, here we are. We kind of like cycle through where we didn't have it because it caused a problem, but it's the marketing, and that like, okay, well, it makes so baby fish doesn't get sucked up, and shrimp and stuff. And what I think has really changed is that maybe 15 years ago, the mantra was more like you have to gravel vac and do all of that. And now the mantra is you have to water change, because you have live plants. You don't necessarily want to vacuum the gravel. And in that instance, the little guard makes sense. Like, you're not going to suck up your shrimp, which 15 years ago, shrimp were very rare to be keeping in mass. Now everyone's got a cherry shrimp, whether they want it or not, almost.
Right.
And so I think it's weird that now you have this like contraption that sells for like $10 that 15 years ago we were throwing out. And you can still get on the Lee's ones. They have like, do you want it with the strainer or without? But even they were like, oh, people have thrown this away. We need to have two different items that are dang near the same, but you can order it without the plastic now. And so that's one where I am perplexed of like, that's so bizarre. And the reason I don't sell it is because I don't think people need it. You can use pantyhose or a net, and I do think most people should be kind of vacuuming at least the top half inch of the gravel or so. And it's still not a perfect system. You can still get baby fry through there. It prevents most of it. And but yeah, it was perplexing to see it go full circle. I'm like, wow, that's bizarre that this thing that we throw away because it's causing problems is now. And by the way, the people that like get it, review it, and all that, they're bonkers for it. Like, it's the perfect thing for the person that needs it. It's the best thing ever. And for the people that don't need it, it's just like, this is crazy.
Is there anything that's coming out that or that you've been testing that you're super excited about?
Well, it's mostly a technology. I think what's going to really change the hobby is all the Wi-Fi stuff. So we know, well, I don't know that we, like everyone knows this, but for the last couple of years, a lot of the companies have been working on Wi-Fi controlled canister filters and heaters so that you would get a notification if flow slowed down or if it was malfunctioning, all of that kind of stuff. And I think that will have the chance to make us better fish keepers. So one of the reasons I don't like canister filters is I'm guilty of it. Of I put a canister filter on there and I clean it once a year. Like it's too long of maintenance probably for it to be, for everything a canister filter can do. The longer you don't service it, the worse it is at it. Where a sponge filter, like, it can only do this, but I also service it because it's in my face. I see it dirty. I know it doesn't have a huge capacity, so I better service it. And I think that, just like lights going Wi-Fi and little Wi-Fi timers and like the new studio, all of my lighting is Wi-Fi. I like to plug in auto feeders to Wi-Fi timers, so now you can hook them up. In fact, the camera I'm talking to you on right now is on a Wi-Fi plug just because I like to hit a button instead of like it's all covered in wires and everything. And so I think that's going to really allow some of the technology to move forward. Things we'll see a merge of like a Fluval like G7 filter that had TDS meters and flow meters and all of that. The minute that starts tying into an app, and now we're getting like the Chinese have had it for a long time. We're on their aquariums that always show temperature, pH, and all of that, and that never translated to America. But once you start getting that in apps, I think it'll be nice to know, the CO2 you're injecting is really pushing down the pH more than I thought, and we can kind of talk about settings. Like I see that with lights a lot of like, what's the perfect settings for this style tank? And that conversation is happening more because the app can take a screenshot and post it online and someone can see exactly what you're doing, the results you're getting. And which opens itself up for companies like what's the new one that Oliver Knott and George Farmer, it's like the in-camera tank and everything.
The Felix.
So that's like the beginning of, and if everything's controlled by Wi-Fi, then you could get, an expert to help you and like look at settings and all of that. That's the next evolution for, maybe our customer service. Like, your light's having a problem? Ooh, we were able to log in and see your settings. There's where you're going wrong. You have the night light on all night long. It's growing algae. And so I think that's going to be something that's real exciting to me. And I believe that when we add technology like that, companies are forced to get more, I guess, honest or something like that. The minute you get a notification every time your heater's malfunctioning, they're going to have to become more reliable. Because if you're getting a notification all the time, that's going to be a bad reputation for them. And so right now, as long as your heater doesn't cook or not come on, it's working. Like, it's just working. Like, fish are okay. And fish have a wide range, but the minute we notice that with the Fluval heaters, they've got a low flow option on it.
Oh, those E-Series ones?
Yeah, they lose their mind of like, I never had that problem with other ones. It's like, because it never told you the flow was low. This is a good thing to know that your flow has always been low, and therefore you haven't been getting the best life out of your heater and even heating. And I watch people, they go, I got rid of it. I could never get that LF to go off of there. And so I got my other heater works fine. It's like, but it was telling you, like, the problem is still there. You've just replaced it with something that won't tell you the problem's there. And so I see, both sides of it. And really, it's like we should embrace, like, we now have a way to monitor if the flow is enough. Your flow wasn't enough. You should go, how can I increase that? Not, how do I get technology that won't, it's just like, I swept the dog poop under the rug. It doesn't exist anymore. It's like, it's still there. You just don't see it now.
I hit it with Febreze. We're clear.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those like, and I can never figure out that mindset of like, it's not that it's wrong. It's that you can now measure for it. It's like, I went to the doctor and they told me I was fat. I don't go to doctors anymore. Not fat anymore. Like, that's not how things work.
Yeah, problem solved.
Yeah, I could solve that really. I just don't go to doctors. Don't have scale either. magical.
Corey, I've had a great time talking to you, and I really appreciate you coming on and doing an interview. I've been watching you for years. I'm a big fan of what you put out there, and I think you do a great job. You surround yourself with really top quality people too, and you have a great support staff and friends, and you've built a great community. I think you're a huge part of what it is to be a fish tuber, and I just want to thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, I always try to do that, and I'm always analyzing what can I bring. I've been following you for quite a while, and what really, I guess, cemented me to always going like, what is Sean up to? Is the clones, like, because I just know what clued in for me is like I talk fish, I look at fish all day long, so to watch another fish video is few and far between for me. It's like, well, I'm supposed to be making that instead of consuming that.
Right. Yeah.
But then when you see like the clones come in, you're like, I know what that I can only imagine and know what that takes to script and to actually do, and the work going into that. Like, this is something magical that I really enjoy how it's being done, and like, oh my gosh, he went that extra step to actually make that happen too. Like, he put way too much time into this video, and I always wonder, like, do the public know that like he just put a week's worth of work into this 12-minute video versus like me, I just talked like an idiot for 12 minutes and people loved it that one, because it's, and I see that, and that's what I respect of seeing is like when people go above and beyond, because we all know like, yeah, I can just do this video and people are going to watch it, and then you can do that video with all that extra work, the same amount of people watch it, but there'll be a few people that know what it took and really admire it, and I think there's been some really clever things done with the clones, and I thought that was a very unique aspect, and I understand why it's not in every video. I know there's a lot of work and all of that, but
Oh yeah.
it's always a
It almost
delight when I
broke me.
see it.
It almost broke me.
I could believe it because it's just it's you got to be three pieces of talent, and the editing time is, it's not just three more times work, it's way more work because it's we've flirted with like trying to do that, like what if we did a clone thing and submitted it to him, and I'm like, all I'm doing is making Sean work way too hard. That's all I'm going to do is like, we did our part, now do this thing, make it even better and crazier. But I hope, I know your fans probably love it, and I always try to show people like, this is amazing, the amount of work and stuff we get to see in a YouTube video. And I reflect on that, not often enough, but the amount of just like budget and time people put into a video that generates $26. It's really it's like watching a starving artist for most of it. I mean I know like we're not starving, but we have to spend more money to produce videos than we get back from them, and we make a lot of money on YouTube. Like, we do well, but it's like when you start looking at all the people we have to work on this stuff and all of that, and I know just from talking to the creators, most of the same thing. It's like, yeah, you're making, maybe you're making a couple $1,000s. Like, well, I had to buy a camera and a microphone and a plane ticket to Coachella. Oh, they gave me the hotel free, and somehow, and then I bought some stuff, and somehow, like, no one's really like doing that well on it, but the creative outlet makes them a better person, and there's always that like, maybe I'll wait for big time, and then there's that thing that keeps it going on in life. But I really appreciate it, and I always want creators to know, just because I'm not commenting on your stuff doesn't mean I'm not watching it. I don't watch everything for dang sure, because no one can, but I always try to keep tabs, and I also never want to try and derail it. It's a weird thing when you get to a size where you hop in on someone's live stream, you say something, and then it's like, oh, hi, Corey, hi, and then it's like you can see it visually, like, throw off the presenter, and I feel horrible. It's like I walk into a room and someone's presenting, and I'm there to learn, and then I'm like, I'm here, everyone! I hate that someone else would have to go through that, so...
The whole comment section basking in your glory while you're just like, I just
want
to say hello.
Point, like, well, here's this chunk of like, God, Corey's here, okay, skip that. But where was the stuff you guys were asking and all of that? So I try to keep a real low profile, because honestly, there's so much to teach by every creator. I love learning. One of my favorite tanks you ever did was your like little steampunk tank where it's got the hole and all that. Like, I really nerd out on when you've got the head in the hand and stuff in one of them. Like, I really nerd out when you do that stuff that money can't buy. When I'm just like, look at this guy, he's creating something. That's what I want to see. for me, because I have to do, they're like, let's do a food review. I do all of that. So when I see someone doing something I don't do, that's when I'll watch. And your channel's got a ton of it. I even watch your little gaming channel because I do board games as well. And so, anything that's, if you were to do a fish profile, you're like, I can't stomach that. But all the stuff that actually uses, what makes Sean, I want to consume because I really do enjoy it. So,
Oh, I really appreciate it, Corey. It's been great getting to talk to you. The conventions are so busy, and those times when we get in each other's proximity are so rare that it was really good to spend a little bit of time with you and talk to you on here. And I really appreciate you sharing your story with all my viewers.
Well, thank you very much, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
All right, thanks. All right, I'm just going to stop it there at that awkward ending. And that's the end of this series. This series of 5 anyway. There's a good chance I might continue. As of now, it's more than 2 months ahead of when this video will come out. So I have no idea where I'm going to be in my head or where these videos are going to be in the good graces of your approval or not. But whatever the case may be, I'll be back for another Sunday video real soon. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.